Thank you for taking your time to come out and be here this evening as we opened up God's Word and tried to learn some things and reflect some things about our life and how we do live our life. I came across this paragraph this week, and I want to introduce my lesson by reading it. It says, "I have never been guilty of wrong action, but on my account lives have been lost. Trains have been wrecked. Ships have been sunk, cities have burned, governments have failed, battles have been lost, and a few churches have closed their doors. I have never struck a blow, nor spoken an unkind word, but because of me homes have been broken, friends have grown cold, the laughter of children has ceased, wives have shed bitter tears, brothers and sisters have been forgotten, and parents have gone broken-hearted to the grave. I have intended no evil, but because of me talents have come to naught, courtesy and kindness have failed, and the promise of success as well as happiness has yielded sorrow and disaster. I have no sound, just silence, no cause for being myself. I have no offering to make except grief and sorrow. You may not know in an instant, or you may not in an instant call me by name, but surely you are personally acquainted with me." My name. Well, what is the name of what we just read about? Neglect. I want to talk to you what the Bible has to say about the idea of neglect tonight. And I suspect that every one of us, as we would examine our lives, that there are times that we realize that we have neglected to do something that we should. And if you listen to all those consequences in that paragraph that I just read, you can see that there can be some bad things that do happen simply because we neglect to do what we should. What does that word neglect mean? To give little attention to disregard, to ignore, to leave undone or unattended, or to fail to attend to. Are there things, both physically and spiritually, that you are ignoring, that you are disregarding? The truth of the matter is that you want to do them, but you just not have got them done. Couple pictures there. First of all, used to be a good farm on the left-hand side. I don't know whether the tractor stopped running or what the story is, but just barely can see a tractor now. The fields have been neglected. The vines have grown up. I remember not very long ago when David went to get a disc off of a farm. We had to cut down a tree that big around in the middle of the disc. It has sat there for years and years and years. The house on the right-hand side is in bad shape. I suspect that there's somebody who doesn't want it to be in that bad shape. When I first started coming to Columbia, back a long time ago when I was dating Rosemary, there used to be a house right across the highway where 3 widow women lived. They all passed away. And nothing was done with that house. It wasn't long before you could see a hole up there in the roof. And it wasn't long that the thing just literally caved in on itself. Somebody neglected to take care of it. I don't believe they meant for that house to fall apart and to finally fall down. But that's what happened to that old house. What happens if you neglect to take your medicine? You might not get over your sickness. Perhaps you will die. I read an interesting story in preparing this. It happened in St. Louis in 1984. And there is a woman's house literally caved in on her. But what she had noticed, she was up in the attic one day. It was probably 2 to 3 years earlier than this. And she noticed 3 or 4 bees flying around. Well, on that day in 1984, her house caved in because the bees had made hundreds and hundreds of pounds of honey in the attic. If he just got those 3 or 4 bees out, it wouldn't happen. She intended to do, but she neglected to do it, and it caused the ruin of her house. What happens if you neglect to pay your bills? You know, here comes the water bill through the mail, and it's sitting there on the countertop, and you just don't get it done. One day you're going to that faucet, you're going to turn it on, and nothing's going to come out of it. You didn't intend for that to happen, but because of neglect, it did happen. And I remember in my early days teaching here, there was a woman that was a janitor out at the high school, and she had to start bumming rides to get home. And I asked her, I said, "Myrtle, what happened to your car?" Well, she had neglected to change the oil for years. And she said, "I took that car to the shop, and the man said when he took the oil plug out that mud fell out of it. It had done turned to a solid instead of a liquid there inside the oil pan." She didn't want to lose her car, but her car was absolutely worthless now because she had neglected the maintenance on that. These are things that you and I are familiar with as far as life is concerned. But tonight I want you to know that the Scriptures says several things about neglecting things as well. And so there are several things I want to point out with you here this evening. And the first one is going to be is that many times we will neglect God's Word. Look at that picture of that old dusty Bible sitting there. It's accumulated dust for a long time, and somebody scribbled on that, "Read me." If that Bible was being read, it would not look like that. I would ask you, are you neglecting to read God's Word? I want you to know that if you're just counting on what you get here on Sunday morning and Sunday evening and Wednesday evening, you're not getting enough. If you think that your children are getting enough just in Bible classes, they're not. As God's people, we are called upon to study God's Word. Psalm 119, verse 16, the psalmist says, "I delight in your decrees. I will not neglect your word." Ask yourself honestly this evening, are you neglecting God's Word? In Ezra chapter 9 and verse 10, Ezra says, "We have disregarded, ignored, neglected the commands you gave to your servant the prophets." And so there were things that when they came back and began to rebuild Jerusalem and that wall around about it and the temple there inside the city, they began to realize that there are things that we have not done in a long time that God's Word told us to do. So I ask you tonight, are you neglecting God's Word? The second thing that I want you to think about is, are we neglecting spiritual matters? In Nehemiah chapter 10 and verse 39, Nehemiah says, "We will not neglect the house of our God." And what he was talking about there was offerings that the people were making. They had promised tithes and they had promised offerings, and yet it just hadn't happened. And I would ask you today to think about the things that you do as far as giving is concerned. Are there things that you think about as far as the church is concerned, or are there good projects and good works that you think about, this would be a great thing to do and I ought to be doing that? Does it ever come to place? Nehemiah says we're not going to neglect God's Word, and because of that, the house of God, and because of that, it was built. In Luke chapter 11 and verse 42, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and he says, "Woe to you." Well, why? "Because you give 1/10 of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God." So there is some mint and some rue in that picture there. And he would say about those herbs that you would go in there and you count 10 stalks or 10 leaves, 9 for myself and 1 for God. But some things that are even more valuable than that was his justice and love for God, love for your fellow man. He says you're ignoring that. You are neglecting that. The third one that I want you to think out along that line, also found in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 16. Translation I use uses the word forget here, and do not forget, but many translations use the word neglect. And do not neglect to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. Are there good things that you want to do, that you told yourself, I'm going to do, but you haven't done? Are you neglecting things that you know ought to be done? Do you neglect the work of God? Back in the early days of the church, we're going to look at a couple different passages here that deals with this idea of neglect in two different ways. Acts 6 verses 1 and 2. In those days when the number of disciples was increasing, the Grecian Jews among them complained against the Hebraic Jews because their widows were being overlooked. He's neglected in the daily distribution of food. So the 12 gathered all the disciples together and said, it would not be right for us to neglect the ministry of the Word of God in order to wait on tables. So there are two ideas within this one passage. There were widows that should have been helped. I don't know why, but the passage is pointing out that there's two different kinds of people right here, the Hebraic and the Grecians. And it may be that one group is taking care of one and not the other. And so the instructions goes out, do not overlook them. Do not neglect them. Do not ignore them. Meet their needs as well. And then the apostles are going to say that we've got a task to do. We got work to do. He refers to this work as seeing that the widows have food as a waiting on tables. And he says, choose you 7 men to take care of this situation. But we cannot neglect the ministry. We cannot neglect telling what God's Word is. Another one that I want you to think about that the Scriptures talks about is discipline. Do we neglect discipline? And no, we're not just simply talking about kids that we try to get them back on the right track. We're even talking about ways that God can even discipline us, and that's talked about in the book of Hebrews as well. When we are corrected, when there is some discipline that comes our way, do we learn from it? Do we pay attention to it? Proverbs 10:17, he who heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. So if we are going to ignore, or if we are going to neglect the correction that we have found, not only are we harming ourselves, but Solomon, the wise man, says that you're going to lead others astray. In Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 18, he says, he who ignores discipline comes to poverty and shame, but he who heeds correction is honored. So again, are we neglecting the discipline that has come our way, both young and old? Are we learning from the mistakes that we have made so that we don't make that any longer? And one that I think we're all very familiar with, the word neglect is used in most translations. The translation that I'm using in Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 25 says, let us not give up meeting together. But most translations are going to translate it, let us not neglect meeting together, as some of the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. To me, one of the saddest things is empty pews. And I know we have a large building, and I know that at this point in time in the history of this congregation, we're not going to fill every pew. But there are pews that are empty. The people ought to be here. And a lot of times, it goes back to that opening paragraph, you did not intend not to do it. You still love God. You still want to serve God. But something's got in the way. And because of that, you have neglected something that is very important to do, and that is the worship of God. And so here is a warning to the church, and I think it is a warning that was offered in some very severe times of persecution. We're not faced with that, and yet we are faced with a lot of folks that neglect coming together. And I want to encourage those that may be at home listening tonight to stop and to think about whether or not you're really neglecting coming together as you should. There are certainly many legitimate reasons as to why people will still continue to listen online. But maybe we're neglecting to do what God has asked us to do. Learn from what this scripture says. Do not neglect meeting together. And then I want you to stop and think about another aspect of our life. A few weeks back, John talked about all the various different types of gifts that are possible for us as God's people. It's different for all of us. But whatever gift that God has allowed you to have, are you using it? Paul wrote to Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:14, "Do not neglect your gift, which was given you through a prophetic message when the body of elders laid their hands on you." Don't neglect it. Make sure that you are using whatever talents it is that God has given you. And then I believe the majority, if not all of us, are familiar with the parable in Matthew chapter 25 about the one-talent man. Money was what a talent was at that day and time. He was given this sum of money. Another was given 5, another one 10. Depends upon which account of the parable. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes 2 and 5. But here is a man that's given 1. And what did he do? He neglected it, because he dug a hole in the ground and he buried that. And when the master came back to call for an accounting, he was not happy with that man whatsoever. Are there things that you are good at doing, that God has given you a gift to do, and you stopped using it? Is it just kind of faded away because you've neglected to take care of it? If so, I ask you to stop and to think about that tonight. The last one I want you to think about is from our scripture reading tonight. Hebrews chapter 2. We must pay more careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. I have a picture of a boat in my mind when I read that. And if you don't secure that boat real well, then it can go and just float on away. The boat wasn't planning on doing that. It just happened. Why? Because of the neglect of some individual to tie it down like what they should have. That is neglect. And that's what he's going to talk about here. For the message spoken by angels was binding, and every violation and disobedience received its just punishment. How shall we escape if we ignore such a great salvation? Translation that Alex read tonight had that word neglect in there. How shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? It is an absolutely wonderful thing that has been offered to us. Don't ignore it. Don't disregard it. Realize that there are punishments that come if we do neglect it. You're talking about whether you will find salvation forevermore in the wonderful place called heaven, or whether you will be in that place that is cursed that we call hell. I do very much believe in the parable of the lost sheep, that it was just neglect that caused him to be lost. You got 100 sheep there. 99 of them went this direction, but I could just imagine that sheep looking down and seeing some grass there and seeing some more grass there and seeing some more grass there, and he just keeps getting farther and farther away, and he looks around and nowhere to be seen. He neglected to pay attention to what the rest of the herd was doing. It is an easy thing for us to neglect to do something. I would ask you tonight, are there things that you are neglecting to do? You know, the story of the Good Samaritan. The priest and the Levite didn't rob that man. They didn't beat that man, but they just neglected to take care of him. When I look at Matthew 25 and the judgment scene there are some folks that are shocked when they hear Jesus say, "Depart from me." You know, if we had seen you hungry, we'd give you some food. If we had seen you naked, we'd give you some clothes. If you needed a visit from us, we would have visited you. Whatever it is, we would have done it. But the truth is that they have neglected to take care of other people around about them. And so in reality, they have neglected to take care of Christ. I would ask you, are you neglecting to give what you should? Are you neglecting your family? And you realize that here in the United States we have a crime called child neglect, and it happens on a very regular basis. Are you taking care of your family? Are you neglecting to pray? Are you neglecting to share the story of Jesus? There are untold number of questions that we could ask tonight, both from the physical standpoint of life and the spiritual standpoint. Are we neglecting things, or are we doing what we should? I finished with one final verse tonight, and it's a verse that I think we all know, but it's one we don't like to think about a whole lot. James 4:17. Anyone then who knows the good that he ought to do and doesn't do it, we're not talking about outright rebellion. It may just be simply, I have neglected to do it, or I have forgot about it, or I have ignored it, or I have disregarded it. But nevertheless, the end result is the same. You sin. And so here's just a simple little lesson tonight for us to stop and to think about that word that is found quite often within God's Word. As we conclude, I want to ask again, is there anyone here that has neglected this great salvation? If so, we stand ready to help you to become a Christian tonight. Maybe as we sing this song, you realize there are things that you have neglected in your own life and you know it's really been to your detriment. If you need our prayers, we stand ready to assist you as well. Maybe you realize that somewhere during the course of this year, there are some promises that I have made, and you know what? It's going to be December this week, and I've not done it yet. It's time to do it. Don't put it off. Don't neglect it. If we can help you in any way, come as we stand and as we sing.